Hello, and welcome back to my course on civics. Here we are in episode 3, where we're going to be talking about the next major document to kind of influence American government. That document is the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were active in the United States from 1781 to 1787, and it was basically the governing document that was in effect from when it was passed during the Revolutionary War until the Constitution was put into place. The reason the Articles of Confederation is so important is because it really tried to embody the ideals of the colonists that they kind of expressed in the Declaration of Independence, and it didn't actually work out very practically the way that they had hoped it would, and so it kind of sets up the reasons why the Constitution is written the way it is. Without the Articles of Confederation failures, the Constitution wouldn't have worked out the way it did. So let's get started talking about the document. Like I said, from 1781 to 1787, the Articles of Confederation governed the colonies and then the states once they became an independent country and the treaty was signed and they were officially free from Britain's rule. And the document outlined what they called a league of friendship amongst states. So it wasn't necessarily creating the United States of America. It was instead saying, we, the 13 states, agree to coexist peacefully and work together, kind of. And so the guiding principle of this document was the independence and sovereignty of each individual state, which basically means that each state in this League of Friendship was in control of its own affairs. No one could tell a state what to do. They were in charge of their own governance. And that ended up being kind of the major downfall of this agreement, is that each state had its own, had control over itself and could ignore other states if they wanted to. And we'll get to that a little bit more in a second. The national government could only really do a few things. It could handle territorial disputes. So like, let's say one state wanted some area out west and another state wanted to claim it. The national government was supposed to be a way for them to solve that issue. They also were allowed to direct war. So if the states ended up going to war with somebody, some other foreign entity, so like Spain or France or England again, the national government was supposed to lead that war effort. And then also it was supposed to handle diplomacy between international diplomacy between the states and other countries like England or France or whoever. Now, the real issue here is that the national government didn't have any authority to levy taxes. Now, if you remember back in the Declaration of Independence, they were very anti-tax, and that was because they didn't have a say in those taxes. So there was nobody in the British Parliament that was speaking for the colonists. Well, so here they said, our national government's not even going to be able to make taxes. So we're the only ones who can make our own taxes, each state individually. Now, that's a problem, though, because as a national government, they did have some things they needed to do. And so if they needed money, they'd have to ask. So they could say, hey, Massachusetts, you've got some money. Do you want to lend us some? And the Massachusetts would say, no. Or they could ask any other state. They'd be like, hey, guys, we need some cash for some stuff. And most of the states would just be like, sorry, that's not going to happen. We're not going to give you any money. So this national government didn't have a lot of things they could do, and it didn't have any money. So really they had no way of doing the things that they were even supposed to be doing because they just couldn't afford it. So really, this whole setup just wasn't really great. Okay, in the national government, okay, each state would send a delegation from anywhere from 3 to 10 or however many people they wanted to send, really. But it didn't matter how many people they sent because each state voted as a block. So instead of individual members of this assembly or group of people would vote, like in our government, that's not how it worked. So the entire delegation from Delaware would vote as one cohesive unit, and the whole delegation from Massachusetts would vote as one unit. So there was only really 13 votes. And so that was also an issue. So there are certain states who had certain ideals, and there are other states who had other ideals, mostly in the north versus south kind of setting. And that really threw off getting anything passed, because the majority of the time, if they really wanted to pass anything major, they needed all of the states to approve. So that wasn't set up very well either. Okay. So during the time of the Confederation, okay, the states were kind of independent to a fault. Like I said, they wouldn't give any money to the national government. They were only really paying attention to themselves, and they would even pick fights with each other. So, for instance, there were states who would charge taxes on bringing goods in from other states. So, like for instance, if you were in New York and you wanted to sell your goods in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania might say, "Well, you're going to have to pay us a fee for that," and nobody really enjoyed that. Each state had its own currency, so there was no unified currency amongst the states. You had to like change currencies every time you change, like you travel from one state to another. Um, and yeah, for basically they would just continuously bicker and fight with each other. There was really no unity. You can't really call it the United States of America because they were not united. It was a bunch of different small states bickering with each other in the close proximity. What really kind of showed the weakness, though, of this government was Shea's Rebellion. Shea's Rebellion was when a bunch of armed citizens took up arms and started burning stuff down, attacking people in the countryside. They were basically rioting because things just weren't going well. The national government of the states at that point owed most of these people money. They were veterans, who were they had been promised a pension and they hadn't been getting it. And so they took up arms to kind of solve their problems. And for the most part, the militias and the people who were supposed to be putting this rebellion down, they weren't really doing anything about it. They kind of agreed with the rebellion. So it took George Washington leading a battalion from a different state to come and shut the whole thing down. Basically, they saw George Washington riding on his horse with a bunch of armed soldiers behind him, and they were all like, "Oh, we made a mistake. We should probably stop now." And that's what kind of ended that rebellion. The only thing that could stop it was George Washington being there himself in person. And so this really kind of legitimized concerns among the leaders of each state that this agreement that they had come upon was not working out. There was infighting. The states weren't getting along, and there was no real executive leadership. So there was no way for the national government, this union of states, to unify and cohesively become one nation. Instead, it was just 13 nations, little nations, hanging out together. And those little nations were weak individually, and together they could be much stronger like they were during the Revolutionary War. So going into 1787, they called a conference, and what they were going to do is they were going to get together and they were going to talk about amendments for the Articles of Confederation. So they were going to go in and they were going to be like, look, this isn't working. Let's change some stuff, make it better, and then we can bring it up and we can get it voted on, and then we can take that new compromise and hopefully move on with a better situation. Now, in the Articles of Confederation, it said any move to amend it required every state to say yes. And we're going to see in the next episode, when we talk about the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention, that they did not have every state on board when they finished. But that didn't matter. They decided that it was too important not to move forward. So in the next episode, we'll talk about the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention, and how from there we moved forward with our current system of government under our governing document, the Constitution. Thanks for watching. This has been another episode of Civics, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode. Have a great day.